Sky above Sundown Ridge looked like a bruise stretching across heaven, purple clouds swollen with thunder. A storm was coming, the kind that made cattle run wild and mothers lock their children inside. But the townsfolk of Sundown gathered in the open anyway, boots grinding into the mud, eyes hard with judgment. They weren't here for weather. They were here for blood. At the center of Main Street, the Gallows waited. Two beams of warped pine, blackened by years of desert sun, loomed like a skeletal hand above the crowd. The noose swayed in the rising wind, whispering against the wood as though it hungered for its victim. Ruth Calder stood on the platform, wrists tied behind her, the rope already snug around her neck. Rain had soaked her black dress until it clung to the curve of her pregnant belly, round and heavy with the child she carried alone. Her lips were split and pale. She had bitten them raw to keep from begging. No one in Sundown offered her mercy. Not the women clutching their shawls against the wind, not the men who spat tobacco juice into the dirt as they muttered, "Witch, poisoner, curse-bearer." Sheriff McGraw, a thick man with a drooping mustache and hands too steady for the storm, stepped onto the platform. His voice cut through the restless thunder. "This woman," he announced, "has cursed this town. Her husband wasted to bones in her bed. Our preacher choked black on his own blood after he tried to comfort her. And since she came here, our wells have soured and our cattle died. God has shown us the truth, and the truth is rope." A rumble of approval rolled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Hang her before the baby comes!" Another voice cried, "Devil's spawn!" Ruth closed her eyes. Behind them, she saw her husband as he'd been before the fever, gentle, tired, whispering warnings with his last breath. "Run, Ruth. They'll come for you next." But she hadn't run. She had nowhere to go. This baby was all she had left, and it had slowed her every step. The storm grew heavier. Lightning cracked across the ridge, turning every face ghostly white for a heartbeat. The gallows creaked like an old ship mast. The hangman shifted, hand on the lever, waiting for the sheriff's nod. Ruth felt the child stir inside her, a sudden desperate kick against her ribs. She gasped, stumbling forward, rope digging deeper into her skin. The crowd laughed cruelly at the sight. To them, it was justice. To her, it was terror wearing 1,000 faces. Sheriff McGraw raised his hand. "May the Lord judge her soul." The hangman pulled, the lever shrieked, but before the trap could fall, the world split apart. Lightning ripped the steeple from Sundown's church, blasting it into a burning spear that crashed across the street. Sparks exploded, wood splintered, horses reared and screamed. Fire appeared. A man stepped out of the smoke. He was taller than most, his black duster dripping with rain, his hat pulled low to shadow his face. At his hip hung a Colt, but his hands were empty. He moved slowly, steadily, like the storm had cleared a path for him alone. The crowd parted without meaning to. Some clutched crosses, others muttered curses. Even the sheriff faltered, his hand hovering near his pistol, but not daring to draw. The stranger climbed the gallows. His boots thudded heavy against the soaked wood. He stood close enough that Ruth could see water dripping down his jaw, close enough that she could smell the gun oil on his coat. For the first time in months, she lifted her chin. Their eyes met. His were pale gray, storm-colored, cold and endless. Yet behind them flickered something she had forgotten existed. Defiance. Not against her, but against everyone else. The sheriff found his voice. "This ain't your affair, mister. Step down or you'll join her." The stranger didn't flinch. His voice was quiet, but it cut through thunder like a blade. "Touch that gun, Sheriff, and you'll be the one swinging tonight." The hush that followed was sharper than silence. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Ruth's pulse hammered. The noose still dug into her skin, but for the first time, it didn't feel like the end. Lightning blazed again, casting the stranger in white fire as his hand rose. Slow, deliberate, toward the rope around her throat. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he had come. But she knew this. The storm hadn't come to bury her. It had come to deliver him. And whatever happened next, Sundown would never forget the night the gallows caught fire, and a widow's fate was stolen from the rope. The fire from the broken steeple still smoldered across Main Street, filling Sundown with the smell of scorched pine and wet smoke. The townsfolk huddled in frightened knots, whispering prayers and curses in equal measure. Above them, the gallows groaned under the storm's weight, rain hissing as it fell against the hot iron nails. And Ruth Calder still stood on the platform, alive. The rope hung slack now, cut clean by the stranger's knife. The hemp dangled like a dead snake against the gallows post, useless. Ruth's knees trembled, her bound wrists numb from the cords that had held them. She could barely breathe, not from strangulation, but from disbelief. The stranger hadn't spoken another word since his warning to the sheriff. He had moved with steady, deliberate hands, slicing her free, lowering her down from the noose as though she were something precious. When her boots touched the planks again, she felt the crowd's shock pressing against her harder than the rope ever had. "Untie her!" the sheriff barked finally, fury making his voice crack. His hand hovered near his holster, but the stranger's gray eyes kept him still. The stranger answered at last, voice flat as cold steel. "She walks free tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The hangman took a step back, pale as candle wax. Nobody dared climb the platform to oppose him. Ruth stared at the man beside her. Rain plastered his hair to his temples, and his duster clung to broad shoulders scarred by years of travel. He looked like he belonged to the storm itself, carved from its fury. He hadn't even drawn his gun, yet every armed man in Sundown seemed reluctant to breathe too loud. Sheriff McGraw finally spoke the thought weighing on every tongue. "Who the hell are you to interfere in Sundown's justice?" The stranger turned his face toward him slowly. A crack of lightning lit the hollows of his cheek, the shadow of an old scar across his jaw. "Justice," he said, each syllable deliberate, "isn't murder dressed in Sunday clothes." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Murmurs surged through the crowd, some agreeing, more hissing in outrage. Men who'd been brave when it was only a widow on the rope now shuffled their boots, unwilling to test the gray-eyed stranger. Ruth swayed where she stood. The storm pressed harder against her lungs. She whispered hoarsely, "Why? Why help me?" The man glanced at her, only for a second, at the stranger's chest. But the stranger moved first. He stepped in front of Ruth, drawing his Colt in a blur of motion that seemed faster than the lightning overhead. The barrel gleamed as he leveled it at the sheriff. His other hand pressed Ruth gently back against the post, shielding her with his own frame. "Holster it," he warned, his voice calm, terrifying in its certainty. "I don't miss." For a breathless eternity, rain hammered the wood, Thunder rolled like drums of war, and sundown held itself on the knife edge of violence. Then Sheriff McGraw slowly lowered his weapon. The mob faltered, their courage bleeding away as quickly as it had flared. The man with the rifle slipped back into the crowd, face pale. The stranger holstered his Colt, though his eyes never left the sheriff's. Then he crouched and cut the ropes binding Ruth's wrists. Her hands fell numb at her sides, blood rushing back into her fingers with a painful sting. She clutched her belly instinctively, as though to reassure the child that life still belonged to them. The stranger leaned close enough for her to hear over the rain. "You can't stay here." She blinked at him. "Where?" "Anywhere but sundown." His gaze swept the hostile faces around them. "These people already buried you in their hearts. If you wait until dawn, they'll finish the job." The truth in his words hollowed her chest. She had lived in Sundown for nearly 3 years. All that time she had prayed for acceptance, for mercy, for a chance to raise her child among neighbors. Now she saw what she had refused to admit. She had never been one of them, and she never would be. The stranger reached for her arm, steadying her as another bolt of lightning rattled the platform. He didn't ask permission. He simply guided her down the steps, through the stunned, silent crowd. No one dared move. The storm hissed, rain striking tin roofs, the only applause to their escape. At the edge of the street, he led her toward a waiting horse, a dark bay gelding tethered beneath the half-dead cottonwood. The animal stamped nervously, but stilled under his touch. Ruth hesitated. "I can't ride like this." Her voice broke as she gestured to her swollen belly. "You'll ride," he said, lifting her with surprising gentleness into the saddle. The weight of her body pressed against the horn, but his hands steadied her. Then he swung up behind, his presence a wall of heat and steel against her back. The mob finally found its voice. Shouts rang through the storm. "Stop them! Shoot him! Hang the witch!" The stranger's spurs dug lightly into the gelding's sides. The horse lunged forward. Months. Hope. Behind her, she heard the stranger speak for the second time, low enough for only her to hear. "My name's Daniel Cole. Remember it. You'll need it before this is over." The storm swallowed the rest. The road out of Sundown was a crooked scar cut through the sagebrush hills, and the storm chased them down every mile. Hooves thundered against mud, water splashing up to Ruth's skirts. She clung to the saddle horn, her breath ragged, her swollen belly pulling at her strength. Behind her, Daniel Cole sat steady as a granite wall, reins loose in his hands, guiding the gelding through darkness, as if he had ridden these hills his whole life. For the first time since the rope had grazed her throat, Ruth dared to speak. "They'll follow," she whispered. Daniel's answer came calm, almost too calm. "Of course they will." The certainty in his tone chilled her more than the storm. She turned her head slightly, rain stinging her face. "Then why ride straight into open country?" "Because men like McGraw hunt shadows," he said. "Give them enough dark and they'll lose courage. But if we keep moving, keep higher ground, we'll have choices when dawn comes." The words didn't comfort her, but they carried a logic that kept her from despair. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the horse's hooves. It was steady, relentless, like a heartbeat that refused to die. Hours passed in wet silence. The storm broke only near midnight, leaving the land raw and glittering beneath a half-shrouded moon. They rode until Ruth's body sagged in exhaustion. At last, Daniel slowed the gelding near a stand of cottonwoods, their trunks bent by decades of wind. He dismounted first, his boots squelching in the mud. With surprising gentleness, he helped Ruth down. Her legs gave way, and he caught her before she hit the earth. For a moment she leaned against his chest, her breath against his collarbone, and the heat of him steadied the tremor in her bones. "We'll stop here," he said. "An hour's rest. No more." Ruth nodded weakly, lowering herself onto a patch of grass. Daniel tied the gelding beneath the trees, then returned with his saddlebag. From it he produced a canteen and a packet of dried meat. He pressed the water into her hands first. She drank greedily, then winced as the baby shifted again, a sharp pain cutting across her side. Daniel noticed. His gray eyes narrowed, not with impatience but with calculation. "How long?" Ruth understood the question. 2 weeks, maybe less." "Less," he said flatly. "You won't last 2 weeks with them on your trail." She wanted to protest, but the truth of his words rang bitter on her tongue. She took the meat, chewed slowly. Across the fireless dark, Daniel crouched with his Colt leaned back against the tree, exhaustion dragging her down. Sleep tugged at her, but fear kept her eyes half open. The stranger, Daniel Cole, sat motionless, his silhouette carved against the moonlight, watching the hills as if they might come alive with enemies. And before dawn, they did. Hoofbeats. Faint at first, then louder, echoing through the canyons. Ruth jolted awake. Daniel was already standing, Colt drawn, his other hand steady on the gelding's reins. "They've found us," he said simply. Out of the mist rode 5 men, their shapes blurred by rain, their rifles glinting in the pale light. At their head was Sheriff McGraw, his mustache darker from the wet, his rage burning clearer than any torch. "Hand her over, Cole," McGraw bellowed. "You don't know what you're protecting. She's poison." Daniel's voice came back calm. "I've seen poison. She ain't it." The 5 riders spread out, circling. Ruth pressed her hand to her belly, every instinct screaming to flee, yet her body too heavy, too fragile to move. Daniel shifted just enough to shield her again, his revolver steady. "Last chance, stranger," McGraw warned. "Give her up, and maybe I'll let you ride out alive." Lightning flickered across the distant ridge, illuminating Daniel's face. He looked carved of stone, unmovable. "You had your chance to play judge," he said. "Now you'll find out what it costs to play executioner." The air crackled, with the weight of violence about to break. Rain began again, pattering like drum beats on the earth. Ruth held her breath, heart hammering so loud she swore it would betray them. McGraw snarled and raised his rifle. The first shot of the hunt split the morning sky. The first rifle crack split the dawn wide open. A bullet screamed past Daniel's shoulder, biting into the cottonwood behind him. Splinters rained down onto Ruth's lap as she gasped, clutching her belly. Daniel didn't flinch. His Colt answered with a flash, and one rider toppled from the saddle, crashing into the mud with a hollow thud. The horse bolted, reins dragging like a snake. "Down!" Daniel barked, shoving Ruth flat against the grass. He pivoted, firing twice more in quick rhythm. Another outlaw jerked backward, his rifle clattering from his hands before he pitched sideways into the wet earth. But McGraw and the others kept coming. The sheriff spurred his horse forward, teeth bared, rifle raised like a spear. Daniel shifted into a crouch, sighting down the barrel of his Colt. His expression never changed, carved from storm and stone. The sheriff's rifle barked. The shot grazed Daniel's hat, snapping it from his head. A second later, Daniel fired, and McGraw's mount screamed, rearing high. The sheriff crashed to the ground, his weapons spinning away into the mud. "Daniel!" Ruth cried, pointing with boundless fear. Two riders had broken off, circling behind through the trees. Daniel holstered his Colt and yanked the Winchester from its scabbard on the gelding saddle. He racked a lever smooth as breath, the metallic click snapping through the dawn. The rifle boomed, the kick steady against his shoulder. One rider pitched forward, tumbling headfirst into the dirt. The last man, a young one, no more than 20, froze in the saddle, eyes wide. His hands trembled around his revolver. Daniel aimed, steady, unyielding. The boy swallowed hard, then turned his horse and fled into the fog, disappearing down the ridge. Silence fell, broken only by Ruth's ragged breaths and the distant thunder of the retreating horse. Smoke from the shots hung low, mixing with the mist of the storm. Daniel lowered the rifle, scanning the carnage. McGraw groaned, rolling onto his side. Blood smeared his cheek where the fall had cut him, but he was alive, glaring up at Daniel with eyes full of venom. "You can't keep her," McGraw spat. "She'll bring ruin on you like she did us." Daniel stepped closer, rifle still in hand. "The only ruin here is a town too blind to see its own cruelty." The sheriff sneered, trying to push himself up. Daniel's boot pressed him back into the mud. "Stay down, Sheriff. You've spilled enough blood." Ruth struggled to sit up, her face pale, lips trembling. She looked at the bodies strewn across the clearing. Men she'd seen in sundown. Men who had once bought her bread or tipped their hats in passing. Now they lay dead because of her. "No," she whispered, clutching her belly. "Because of me, they'll never stop." Daniel turned to her, his eyes softer now. "Think you can outrun the whole territory, Cole? The law will call you murderer. And her? They'll call her witch until the day she hangs proper." Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled the rifle away, then reached down to haul the sheriff to his feet. McGraw staggered, mud dripping from his coat. For a moment, Ruth thought Daniel might end it there with a single bullet. Instead, he shoved the sheriff toward his limping horse. "Go back to sundown," Daniel said coldly. "Tell them the widow walks free. Tell them if they come again, I won't be so merciful." McGraw wiped blood from his mouth, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over, Cole. Not by a damn sight." He mounted clumsily and rode off, disappearing into the fog. The clearing fell quiet again. Daniel slid the Winchester back into its scabbard, then returned to Ruth. He knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle, as they brushed damp hair from her face. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, though her body trembled violently. "No. But the baby," her voice cracked. "The baby's coming sooner than I thought." Daniel's gaze flicked to her belly, then to the horizon where the light of dawn broke through the clouds. He cursed under his breath, rare emotion slipping through his calm. "Then we move now," he said. "There's a cabin 2 ridges over. If we can make it by nightfall, you'll have shelter." Ruth stared at him, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "Why are you doing this for me?" Daniel met her eyes. His voice was low, nearly lost in the wind. "Because once, someone saved me when I didn't deserve it. I reckon it's my turn to pay that back." He helped her onto the gelding again, steadying her carefully. She winced as another pain twisted her, but she bit down hard, refusing to cry out. Daniel mounted behind her, his presence firm and unyielding. As they turned toward the rising sun, Ruth cast one last glance at the bodies in the mud. Shadows of sundown, men who'd chosen hate over mercy. Then she faced forward, clutching the saddle horn, the child inside her kicking against ribs as if demanding life. The road ahead was uncertain, but in Daniel's steady grip and the storm-washed dawn, Ruth felt something she hadn't in years. A chance. The trail to the cabin cut through jagged hills where the storm had carved rivers of mud. Daniel urged the gelding forward, his arm firm around Ruth's waist. Her breathing grew shallow, her head bowed against the pounding rhythm of the horse. Every few minutes she winced, clutching her belly. "We're close," Daniel muttered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. Her, the child, or himself. By dusk, the hills opened into a clearing. The cabin crouched against the slope, half collapsed, its roof sagging beneath years of weather. Smoke no longer curled from its chimney, but the stone walls still stood. Daniel swung down and helped Ruth to the ground. She nearly crumpled, her face pale, lips trembling. "It's time," she whispered. Daniel guided her inside. The cabin smelled of dust and pine rot. He spread blankets on the floor, lit a lantern with hands that shook more than they had in battle. Ruth lay back, sweat already beading on her forehead. Her eyes found his. "I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," Daniel said. He knelt, gripping her hand. "Not anymore." The night stretched long and merciless. Ruth cried out as the labor tore through her. Daniel braced her, brought water, whispered words he didn't know he remembered. Outside, winds scraped at the shutters like claws. Wolves howled in the far valley, or maybe men, it was hard to tell. Hours passed. The storm returned, rain drumming the roof, thunder rolling like war drums. Ruth's voice broke into sobs, but she fought. Teeth clenched, refusing to surrender. Daniel held her shoulders, steadying her through each wave of pain. He had seen death many times, but never life claw its way into the world so fiercely. And then, at the darkest hour, the child's cry split the storm, a baby's wail, sharp and alive. Ruth sobbed, half laughing, half weeping as Daniel wrapped the tiny form in his coat. He placed the child into her trembling arms. "A daughter," he whispered, "strong as her mother." Ruth kissed the infant's damp forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time since her husband's death, she smiled. But peace lasted only moments. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, pounding through the mud outside the cabin. Torches flickered through the cracks in the shutters, voices shouting in the storm. Sundown had come for their witch. Daniel rose, jaw tight. He loaded his rifle with calm precision, every click of brass against steel echoing finality. "They won't stop, Ruth. Not tonight. Not ever." Ruth's arms tightened outside. Rain sheeted down, torches sputtering as the mob circled the cabin. Sheriff McGraw rode at their head, bandaged and furious. His voice bellowed over the storm. "Cole, hand her over. That child's cursed. Sundown won't suffer it." Daniel leveled the Winchester across his arm, lightning flashing down the barrel.
"You'll suffer plenty if you take one more step."
The crowd shifted, murmurs trembling between bravery and doubt. McGraw sneered, raising his arm to rally them. But then a sound silenced them all. The child cried again, loud, fierce, defiant. It carried through the storm, over the mob, into every ear, like a judgment older than law.
Men glanced at one another uneasily. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Even the horses shied, nostrils flaring.
Daniel seized the moment. His voice thundered like the storm itself. "You call her cursed? Then curse me too, because I'll carry this child through fire and rope and bullet, and any man here who thinks he can take her—" He cocked the rifle, the sound loud as a gallows snap. "Will hang on the same tree he meant for her mother." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his figure on the cabin steps. Tall, unyielding, a storm given flesh. Behind him, the baby's cries rose again, unbroken. McGraw's hand trembled. His eyes darted across the crowd, searching for courage, finding none. One by one, torches lowered. Boots shifted back. The storm drowned their anger, leaving only fear. At last, McGraw spat into the mud. "This ain't over, Cole." He wheeled his horse, disappearing into the rain. The others followed, their voices swallowed by thunder, until only hoofbeats faded into distance. Daniel lowered the rifle, chest heaving. He turned back into the cabin. Ruth lay cradling the child, eyes shining with exhaustion and awe. "They left?" she whispered. "For now," Daniel said. He sank to his knees beside her, brushing damp hair from her brow. The baby's tiny fist opened, gripping his finger with surprising strength. His breath caught, something unspoken breaking inside him. Ruth smiled faintly. "She's not cursed. She's a storm's child. Born to fight. Born to live." Daniel nodded slowly. Outside, the storm began to ease, leaving the hills washed clean. Inside, the baby's cries softened into steady breathing. For the first time in years, Daniel Cole believed tomorrow might still be worth facing.